boarding homes. In and out, easy in and out. Safety and also privacy. Think of it as converted motels. So we want to also throw out this idea that there is a step that the private sector can get behind, that one place to move people from shelter that can be done quicker and faster while you're waiting for affordable housing,
Mayor,
is conversions.
I'm sorry, let me ask a quick question. Just because handing an attorney a mic, all due respect, with no parameters on the subject or time, and we were supposed to be doing this really quick. And so if we're going to, I want to stand up and say relevance because we're talking specifically about 3 ordinances. So thank you for that context, but I think we need to talk about the changes that we were.
I finished the context.
There will be an opportunity to talk about the larger issues.
Right.
But
the reason why I brought the context up is for the future discussion of the third basket. What do we do until then?
okay, so hold that thought because we'll get back.
I am holding it.
Okay.
Thank you. So I do want to talk about what our problems is and focus on the public safety, on specific issues before us to throw this out for your discussion. On the issue of aggressive confrontation, one thing that Council Member Garza has asked City Council, has asked the police, don't we have state laws in place right now that would prohibit the same behavior as the proposed statute? I would suggest to you that you read the statutes, because 40 years ago I was a police officer and I had to read the statute. And to your question, how do we know whether you violated the law? Well, first it's the policeman's judgment, and then it's the prosecutor's judgment, and then it's the judge's judgment. All we can do is make it as clear as we can and go down that chain. So I'll give you an example. Assault works, clearly. You can't assault somebody. But what about disorderly conduct? In the state statute, it bans abusive, indecent, profane, vulgar language in a public place, but only if it tends to incite an immediate breach of the peace. Similarly, offensive gestures are only illegal if they tend to incite an immediate breach of the peace. You can read it. There's nowhere else in the disorderly conduct statute that really applies. We think it's important for both the police and the public to have clarity. I had not read, Mayor, your suggested changes, but I can tell you in principle, we really think you're getting to the concerns of the downtown community by being content neutral and focusing on conduct. To the comments about whether it's vague or not, what gives me comfort as a lawyer and as a former law enforcement person is if you read this carefully, there is no aggressive confrontation unless it's intended to or is likely to cause a reasonable person to fear imminent bodily harm or theft. That's the bottom line. You can be as offensive as you want as long as you don't cause that reasonable fear. That gives us the boundaries of the constitutional speech that we need. So that was my comment on the solicitation. So one, I don't think it's duplicative. I think it gives us a specificity of behavior we do need to protect everyone against, including the people living on the streets, by the way. On the issue of camping, on the public safety piece is what you've asked me to address. We've been criticized for, and the community's been criticized for saying, oh, now can people camp in parks? You say, of course not. There's a curfew, for example. This may be a minor point, but I suggest we could add clarity, because if I were a defense attorney, I would read the proposed statute to say, one, you commit an offense if you camp anywhere but a designated area, but you only commit an offense if you're a public threat. How does that square with a curfew when camping generally isn't controlled by curfew? So if that's not the intent, I would just suggest clarity.
Member Alter raised a similar issue with respect to that, and our attorneys are taking a look at it.
And I think that's just a language issue, because I've heard that's not the intent. As to public safety, the culpable mental state, I heard the chief say, well, that could be problematic. Here's a thought. In the state statute that you've modeled this changed language at, there's also a person violates the rule if they've been warned, if they've been asked, been given a reasonable command. Whether you know it or not, you're blocking a driveway. And then they don't respond, that could be a violation. So I think we could have both the culpable mental state and we can have a fair warning. The same thing, camping is a sit and lying. And I think with those changes, we're addressing the public safety issues. So the only thing I would like to conclude with in the third basket is just throw out this as a rhetorical thought, rhetorical question. The sidewalks on Congress are 18 feet wide. There's plenty of place to put a tent, one tent. Is that okay? Is it okay if people lie down at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and sleep? They're not blocking. They're not in a doorway. Is that okay? What if it's 10 people? What if it's 20 people? What if it's 2nd Street? I would suggest to you that I've reviewed statutes in very liberal cities from Portland, Venice, California, LA, and every city has some restriction in their downtown area on where you can sit, lie, and camp. Because it becomes unconstitutional when there's nowhere to sit, lie, and camp. But there's no reason why a matter of public policy you can't restrict the area. And I have heard people talk about or dismiss non-safety related regulations as aesthetics, about people being offended by the homeless. But I want to conclude by reading to you from the City Council resolution on the sit and line ordinance on what the council found was a compelling public need. And I would suggest to you this compelling public need is still here. The council finds that the city has a compelling interest in encouraging and preserving a vital pedestrian-friendly urban core, promoting tourism and business in the central business district, preserving the quality of urban life and in protecting its citizens from intimidating behavior, and encouraging businesses and neighborhoods in the central city where walking is a realistic alternative to vehicles that use fossil fuels. The council finds that in areas with high pedestrian traffic and a high incidence of petty crime related to the public disorder, individuals sitting or lying in the pedestrian right-of-way contribute to a sense of fear, intimidation, and disorder, are disruptive to residents, businesses, and customers, discourage, block, or inhibit the free passage of pedestrians, and contribute to the loss of access to and enjoyment of public places. We are relying on a tax base, an increased tax base to help the homeless. That requires a vibrant downtown. That is a bigger basket 3 issue. I don't have the language for you. I don't have the specific suggestion, but that is an issue that we think needs to be discussed thoroughly.
Thank you, and I appreciate the comments, and I appreciate the edit. Stay there for just 1 second. And I appreciate the help because we're trying to get this into a place where we clearly are taking care, I think, for me, taking care of buckets 1 and 2. You know, sometimes I think that one of your functions has been to raise some of the concerns that are being heard in the community, and enabling that to happen, then we can address them. The APA isn't here today. I would be asking them the same kinds of questions because I think that they have also raised some of the concerns that we hear in the community. And again, we want to make sure that we address them. There was an op-ed piece, I think, that was submitted here this week, and it expressed a concern that I've also heard in other places in the community, that we would be doing something by our action to decriminalize and now to allow people to scream at or touch or block passage, to follow you when you didn't want to be followed. That was before we had proposed keeping the aggressive behavior ordinance, just taking out solicitation. But I hope that, I know you haven't had a chance to read it yet, that you'll take a look at it and see if we have been able now to maintain what was the pre-existing law with respect to each one of those elements. We just have uncoupled it to a solicitation.
You read the concern, which I didn't write, but the concern was that the other laws are not adequate or specific we need something specific and clear. That was that particular concern.
And I hope by that we've been able to hit that. You had reflected, or the writers of the op-ed had reflected a concern in the community that we would be weakening our ability to regulate behavior that impeded public health or impeded safety by putting in the state standards. In that, again, it's our intent not to impede the officer's ability to impede a public safety violation or a public health violation. Please make sure we're accomplishing that in this, because that's not the intent to impede that. As differentiated from the third bucket, where there's not an allegation of public safety or public health, but it goes to the larger issue you were raising in the third bucket, which is, do we want to concern ourselves with the impact on economic development? Do we want to concern it on quality of life? How do we want to deal with the other elements that some in our community are raising other than a violation of public safety and public health?
Yes, I would only add, going back to the public safety, we have another concern. If you don't approach basket 3, we fear that we're going to start seeing the social media we do not want to see in this town, that we're seeing in Portland, we're seeing in Seattle. They're blaming people for being homeless, saying they're turning their cities into cesspools. Where is this anger coming from? It's the spread of encampments, the spread of people living.
Right. But to be
in
fair, we're
line.
talking
so
about
on a public safety issue.
Right.
We're concerned about you're going to be harming the people on the streets by getting public pushback from elements of our society we do not want to hear. In this community.
And I understand
Mayor.
it, but that goes then to the third bucket. Yes, Mr. Flannigan?
To be fair, Mr. Bryce, that fear is coming from your organization.
It is.
Let me finish.
Okay.
The editorial you and the Crime Commission and the Chamber put together is full of exactly the type of stuff we've shown today is not true. And I've had that conversation with the leader of your organization to make that very point 2 days before the editorial went out. So let's be very clear about where misinformation is coming from. And I do take offense to you saying things to this council and wagging your finger in our face saying that we haven't read the law. I guarantee you, we have read the law, and there are some serious issues we're going to work out. That's why it's being postponed for 2 weeks. And I really hope that we can continue this in a very respectful manner.
Okay, I hear the comments. Taking a forward-looking view on this, the